do, like, for the, I guess, the end session, we've heard a lot over the last day and a half now, which seems to have gone incredibly quickly, at least for me. It's been a busy couple of days, but I've really enjoyed spending time with all of you. But we wanted to kind of regroup a little bit and rethink around this concept of the 12 core competencies to success and what next, in terms of, you know, what are some of the takeaways we can get from the conversations we've had, the presentations, and really get some input and insights from, I guess, some of your peers and colleagues here as well around this sort of concept of the core competencies. So we're not going to go through all 12 of them, just kind of pick some highlights here. But just maybe to kick things off, I might start with you, Claudine, if you don't mind, and just to introduce yourself. I'm sure many people here know you, but introduce yourself. And I guess just from your own point of view, if you think about not the core competencies themselves, but the concept of a core competency, what does it kind of mean to you, you know, in your own sort of words? I'd be interested in that. Okay.
Right. So Claudine Ogilvie, CIO at Jetstar Airways. Core competency, I mean, for me, it's really something quite fundamental. It's a skill, it's a competency fundamental to be successful in something that you then build on. And I think that's, in its simplest form, a core competency for me, without which, the reason it's core, why is it core? Without that, it's pretty tough to be successful.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. Good one. Sasa, over to you. Introduce and what do you think? Obviously, you've heard from Claudine here. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, Sasa Pillai. At the moment, I'm fortunate enough to be able to do some research, having just completed up my role at Veolia. And I think, as Claudine said, it's a skill and a capability. But core, in order to be able to deliver against your mandate as an IT leader. Mm-hmm. I think that's what I see as a core competency. Okay,
so relating that back to the, you know, the core role of that CIO IT leader kind of thing as well. Yeah. Okay. Good. Kerry, over to you.
I'm Kerry Campbell. I'm the CIO at Flinders University, and I'm precariously balancing on this chair.
Okay.
Because I can't touch, and everyone can see. I think the core competencies are, as I said, the capabilities that are really core to our roles. These are our new job specs. Okay, this is the things that we're supposed to be really, really good at. So I see that those core competencies are our new job roles. This is what we should be aiming for.
Okay, so more future-looking rather
Absolutely.
than the status quo. No, that's a good one, thank you. So, Aparna, you know, you and I spent, I can't remember how much time, kind of locking ourselves away, sort of looking at all the inputs to come up with these sort of the core competencies themselves, with all the input from everybody and our colleagues at Adapt as well. You've talked about what they are, you know, in terms of and how people need to be thinking, considering about the core competencies. But based on, you know, what we've heard here and the conversations you've had over the last day and a half, lots of them, any surprises to you? You know, if you think about how we positioned it and sort of the conversations you've been having.
That's an interesting question, Matt. Thank you. I think the biggest surprise was to know that a lot of people were already doing something about it. And that was a really pleasant surprise, because I have been having conversations with Claudine and a few more CIOs and CISOs on what the core competencies mean to them, and are they working on any projects that are going to help them achieve them, or how are they approaching them. And most of them are really thinking about it and it resonates with our own definitions and the components. But I just think that what we have here is a little more structured approach to what they can go back and reference back to, and also watch their success, probably, because everyone is doing something or the other, but I think we need a scorecard sort of a thing, or like a dashboard as to how much have you achieved and where you are on your growth path. And if we get there, then that gives everyone a single view of truth for themselves to work more progressively on each of them.
Okay, you use that word that some of us love, some of us hate. You know me well. Structure and I don't go very well together, right? So it's, I'd be interested, as we think about this, and you know, the thought about sort of being much more structured in our approaches for the panelists here. I mean, how easy is it, do you think, to kind of look across all these competencies and think we can sort of build some structure in our day, structure in our team, structure in what we do to deliver on this, when we're really kind of grappling with the day-to-day, right? We can think, Kerry, you talked about the future, for example, but you know what? We got to live the here and now. We've got to get things done today. So how can we kind of juggle that with the need to sort of plan and structure for the future?
It's really interesting because we talk about putting structure around these competencies. You've got things like empowering people. How do you put structure around that? For me, empowering people, actually in those competencies, there's a few that relate together. Empowering people, empowering the workforce makes your bottom line better, right? And you can't structure empowering people. It's like saying, go and innovate, go and be 10% innovative. You've got to empower your people in a way that's unstructured. They're people, it's not a structure. So I think it's really interesting when we try and structure something. I think we lose it, but we do need to measure it. We need to find the ways to measure it. I think if you look at digital transformation, all of us are doing it, right? It's like teenage sex. Everyone says they're doing it. Some of us are doing it, but most of us are doing it badly. So I think if we do the same thing with the core competencies, we're going to end up in the same place.
Okay. All right, I'm just shaking that analogy out of my head. Then we'll move right along. All right, now that's a really good point. Good analogy, actually. So, Claudine, you work in a very kind of diverse organisation from a workforce point of view, like very large workforce, different types of people and so on. So it's kind of building on that as well. I mean, how do we sort of, as we think about our own core competencies, make them relevant to our workforce? And I mean, particularly, one of the core competencies is empower the workforce, okay? And Kerry's kind of started that conversation. So as you think about empowering that workforce, and I would imagine within your organisation, as with many here as well, attracting and retaining talent is, I imagine, a key focus area for your company. So when you think about empowering the workforce, what does that kind of really mean to you, and what do you think we need to be doing or thinking about that?
So, look, empowering the workforce, a lot of it's about helping your people just get on with it, really, and feel empowered to do what they feel is their role. But I think for most of us, we would like our employees to not just do the BAU, the functional BAU, but also go above and beyond and innovate and do cool things that you may not have thought of. And how do you do that? I think first and foremost, it's about creating really strong vision, goals, and an understanding of what are we all trying to collaboratively do together. If you have a really strong understanding of that across your organisation, and not just at a high level, you really need to translate that down, and that's where the effort comes into it, being able to translate that into the different departments, into different roles. Once you do that and people are really clear on that, you can translate that into KPIs, OKRs, whatever suits you in your organisation. But then employees sort of go, you know what, I kind of get it. I'm more comfortable to go outside the bullet points that is, the box that is my role, because I know what we're trying to achieve. And if I do things something a little bit differently, if I innovate over here and I know it's achieving our company vision, our goals, then I know I'm doing the right thing. And that's incredibly empowering, I think.
Okay. So really, I guess in some way, getting the employees aligned on what that company vision is, and not even like necessarily telling them what the right things to do are, sort of enabling them to sort of have the independence to do what they believe is the right thing to achieve that, obviously within the constraints of what we need to be doing as a company, right?
Yeah. Look, and I think you've got to make it easy as well, and that can come down to tools and perhaps various technologies. It can come down to, what can we automate so we can take out the mundane bits of your daily life. And often that has a dual benefit to your company, where you're cutting costs and you're improving the employee experience, or even the customer experience as well. So you can tick a lot of boxes through tools and skill sets. I think it's also really helpful, I find, putting in place frameworks or guidelines within which people can work to, as opposed to, say, rules.
Exactly. A rule when it's not a rule, right? Yeah. Okay.
These are this is the expectation. These are sometimes they're non-negotiables, and we're talking, cybersecurity and the like. But this is the framework within which you work. Go forth and have fun with it.
Okay. That's a really good point. Sarthar, I can see you nodding your head there, and I know you've worked for a lot of different organisations as well. As you think about this, empowering the workforce and sort of, I guess, enabling, as Claudine's talking about, enabling people to, thrive and innovate within themselves, within, to striving towards those sort of company objectives. What are some thoughts from your point of view around this as well, in terms of that empowering the workforce?
I think before I jump into that, just coming back to the structure of the 12 competencies and looking at them, the one thing we should not do is look at them as 12 individual competencies, but rather interlinked. Otherwise, that structure, and you need to break down that structure and understand how they link, because as you move through your digital transformation journey, you'll be drawing on different competencies at different points in time. And they're not linear or they're not in any form, but they should be looked at as a group that can be chopped and changed and, pardon the pun, but adapted for the circumstance.
You can use that all you like.
It's quite parallelly used.
Coming back to your question, I think, and as Claudine was saying, provide the tools and the framework and the guidelines, but also make sure that your employees understand that it's a safe environment to work from, supporting and mentoring them. And I think that's what sometimes is missing, where people are afraid or your employees are afraid to take a risk for fear of retribution or punishment. And it's about giving them the opportunity to take those risks, but also supporting them when they make missteps and actually pointing out how they could do things better. I think more often than not, people over their careers have learned to manage risk in terms of not failing. And when you don't try anything, certainly you won't fail at it. And we don't want to find ourselves in that situation. I don't really subscribe to that, the whole analogy of fail fast, fail quick. I try not to fail, but the reality is we want to give people the opportunity to try things, and when they do fail, if they do, then work with them and show them that they can continue to do this within those parameters and the framework.
But wouldn't by default to that, you're not subscribing to fail fast, but then you're kind of encouraging it. You have to be a little bit clear up front that it is okay, right, to fail.
Can I just challenge, but just a part of that, I actually feel like you have to fail because you have to fail to learn. I would argue you need to frame failure as learnings. And that's actually a really positive way to frame it, and it's about how you fail, not necessarily failing in itself, and then celebrating the learnings and then saying that's awesome, and then the same person should go forth, use those learnings and take it to the next level.
I generally don't call it a failure, but an opportunity to learn. And generally I like to make sure that the individual understands the misstep that caused the failure and how to rectify that and what the learning is. And over the years, I've made sure that I've done that and point out those missteps and how to avoid them by either thinking more carefully about it or taking a step back and looking at the big picture.
Can I just cut in here as well? We call it at Flinders the first attempt in learning. So it's not failure. We're not stigmatising it with failure. But I think what's happening here is we've heard over the course of a day and a half, 2 days, about where Australia is and how we're behind the world in thinking and innovating and why are we so far behind. And I think a lot of it is to do with we keep putting our staff in their boxes and saying you can't go out of these parameters. Yet if you look at someone like Daniel Pink, autonomy, purpose, that's something that we need to give our staff, and mastery of the things they do. We don't need to be directing them to do things. We need to give them those spaces and the big whys to do it. And I think if we let our workforce go, we'll see a big change. And I haven't seen it in the universities that I've been working at. Once you give them that and they have that purpose, they get that purpose from the autonomy and the mastery, then amazing things can happen, and you just need to get out of the way sometimes. So I think sometimes we need to let the reins go and trust our staff and empower them and give them the reason and give them the journey and give them the loose framework to be working in that.
Okay, Apan, I'd love to, given some of the roles you've had and working in sort of new digital style companies, and you and I worked in a company with a lot of opinions, for example, as well. So I'd love to get some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me because from learning, just from saying that you can, fail fast, learn fast, it should not mean that you are allowed to not foresee the project. You're allowed to not prepare and plan and work towards it. So in that way, just stepping back into what worked before in corporates and what works now at startups, we can't dismiss what worked before completely, and we can't completely just accept what's really working at the startups.
Yeah.
So we have to find a balance and find the ideal middle ground as to what can be the optimum work environment that we can provide to the employees, so that they are able to work and get their goals based on how they would like to work on a day-to-day basis. And a typical example is on learning and measurement of performance. I sometimes feel that within the startup culture, because there is more acceptance to failures, there is a sort of more acceptance to mediocrity as well, sometimes.
Yeah, right.
And while in corporates, while there is too much focus on getting things right in first go, that sometimes curtails creative thought process and exploration. Now we have to bring that together and say that if you have a framework for a new idea, your initial idea should be concrete. You should have thought through, at least, think it really through in terms of what the resources you need, what could be the possible failures. If you're already telling me that this might fail under these circumstances, then it probably means that you've already thought through it, and I might have some cushion for that kind of failure. But if you haven't thought through it, then I might see it as that not much thinking has gone into it, and it could go either way.
Okay, so don't fail with no thought into what you're trying to do in the first place.
Yeah, and learn from that failure. Don't accept it saying that it's easy to get on the track saying, yeah, I think it's our organization's culture to accept failures. No, it is not. It is to give you that open cushion and open environment to explore in areas wherein you fail with things which are sort of out of your control. But whatever is within your control, to make sure that you deliver well before the outcome happens, should be done well, I think.
Okay.
So that kind of input, there should be enough effort should have gone into that. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Claudine, thoughts on that? And I'm thinking when we think about sort of startups versus traditional companies, I know not really a startup, but Jetstar and Qantas are kind of two somewhat different organizations / cultures. I'm interested when you think about some of the comments that Aparna just made. I mean, within your own organization, how does that sort of resonate in terms of creating that right sort of culture and mindset within the company?
Yes. Culture is something that's it's very different. It's difficult to create a new culture. And Jetstar, certainly 15 years ago, was this tiny little startup. It was hugely dynamic. There was enormous innovation, enormous change. It was super exciting, but there was tech everywhere. And I think in terms of that journey of maturity, I mean, it's been a really interesting one whereby Jetstar's business has had to mature along the way. We're actually quite large now. We're a group of 4 airlines. And a lot of those systems and processes have had to come together to uplift with the size of the organisation. Scaling can be pretty hard, particularly scaling and remaining low cost, and that's pretty core to who we are. So I think I'm actually really proud to say that a lot of that that culture has remained with Jetstar over the years.
Right.
And a lot of that is to do with, I think, the leadership, the ongoing, the values of the organisation are very clear, have been consistently and repetitively communicated throughout the organisation, and linked and connected quite at a really pragmatic level to what you're doing. So most executives would hold, to give you an example, town halls, and you'll when you want to recognise your employees, Joe did an amazing job at this project, and you're connecting it to your values, and he demonstrated these values, and it's constantly repeating this and showing it through team building events, showing it through the projects and the way that you prioritise, perhaps even your capital funding, and telling employees how and what you've done in that process. So it's actually a very shaping and keeping culture, because I think there was actually a good nervousness that Jetstar might lose that culture along the way. So I think it's been quite a proactive thing, trying to keep that alive, keep that humming.
So remaining sort of very very open and transparent as the business itself grows, and indeed perhaps some of the priorities change as well.
Yeah, the priorities change. I think, you know, it's not culture doesn't just happen either. You really have to work at it. You have to want it, and it takes a lot of effort. So in your leaders and their DRs have to want it and actually walk the talk every day.
Okay.
And if you've already got it, it's a lot easier. Like I said, it's still a lot of effort, but it's a lot easier to maintain a culture or slowly shift it than create one from scratch. So if you've got it, don't lose it.
Exactly. Yeah, we heard that I think from Colin yesterday in his irreverent style as well. So that's right. It's interesting. He said to me one thing. He said to me yesterday was that, you know, leaders can't create culture, but they can destroy it. That's one of the kind of takeaways I took from him as well. So switching gear a little bit. So we talk, and please, if anybody wants to just ask any questions or anything, please put your hand up, and we're happy to take things as we go along as well, of course, make it interactive. You brought up the tech word, so I'm going to throw out the technology conversation here. So we talk about, you know, deliver or drive technology thought leadership. So I think you and I have been talking a little bit about yesterday about some of the things within, I guess, your past organisation where, you know, you have been enabling people to sort of be more involved with some of the technology decisions and processes and so on. So when you think about, you know, drive technology thought leadership, and when we look at it within the realm of the core competencies, it's around things like creating new business models, how do we identify new ways to build, run and maintain architecture, how can we actually develop new ways to evaluate the investments we're making and the outcomes we're looking for. So as you think about this concept of driving technology thought leadership, so from your point of view, what does that kind of mean to you? You know, because thought leadership can be many, many different things, I think, to many people.
Yeah, and certainly people adapt that the definition to suit the specific circumstance as and when it's required. I think thought leadership, there's a plethora of technology out there, and every turn you have a new shiny thing that comes along, and there's sometimes the sphere of missing out or not being involved. So people grab at technologies and they believe that they are being leaders in technology and thinking. But really, thought leadership from my perspective is understanding what the business requires. What are those key priorities that the business is driving towards, whether it's growth, improvement in customer experience, or what are those priorities, and what are the technologies that we as technology leaders need to be exploring in order to deliver against those priorities.
But how do you, so I guess I totally agree with you, like we've got to think about those priorities, but how do we, what tools can we use to sort of identify technology in the first place? Because, you know, we've got magazines, we've got analysts, we've got all this stuff, you know, and there's technology coming at us all the time. And have you sort of seen any great ways of, you know, even before considering the business outcomes, how really getting a sense of what technologies are out there, almost a reality check on technology?
Certainly, there aren't tools out there to do that evaluation. You've got to apply.
Coming back to the structure question here,
yeah.
Right?
Throwing a big one.
Yeah, it would be great if we had a tool where we could put a technology in and evaluate it against our business objective or the outcome we're looking for. And I think that's the value of everyone in this room and all of the technology leaders and the business leaders that we interact and the stakeholders we interact with, is thinking through what do we want to achieve, and then looking at those technologies, evaluating those technologies, and of course applying certain things like architectures and security, et cetera, to make sure that it aligns with the overall requirement of the business. Mm-hmm. Certainly, that also changes depending on the types of technologies or the types of projects that you're doing as well. Mm-hmm. And there again, the mix of the core competencies comes in, and that's why I said you can't put it in any one box. Mm-hmm. You've got to basically adapt the model and apply that to the various technologies. Okay. and align them to the business.
So when we work out, and I'm thinking about this as you're talking, and Kerry, you know, working in the education sector, every person must love a shiny new technology toy, right? You know.
Absolutely.
So when you think about, it's one thing I understand, you know, what is it? But how do you actually kind of get hold of that sort of, that technology thought leadership when you would have, I guess, hundreds of people every day saying, look at this, look at this, look at this.
Absolutely, and I'm in an industry that's run by researchers and academics, so that's really difficult. I know there's an academic in the room, so but the difficult thing is to get that value of that thought leadership into the boardroom. They see us as just IT people that do build the shiny things, but they don't understand that we really do have a power, because we actually see the organisation, the complete organisation from the bottom up. We work in projects right across the organisation, so we can see where a business unit is doing well, we can see where one isn't, and we can try and influence that through the business. I hate the business and IT because there's no component of the business that doesn't have IT in it. We need that to drive the world today. And so it's getting that type of thought that you understand the components of the business that you're in, and what you can bring is how that technology will enable that business and enable that business to do their business more effectively and efficiently. So that's the skill set and the quality that we have. But I think a lot of the times that we're seen as just the IT people in the room, because a lot of people came up to the CIO role from infrastructure and they didn't have that business capability, but that's changed.
Okay.
And it's changing significantly.
Okay, good point. I can just see Jim Berry over there, so if anyone has questions, he'd love to throw the squeezy microphone at you just to open the floor up a little bit. Aparna, I think you're going to make
Sorry, before you go on, just to add to what Kerry's saying, the business doesn't see us as just IT people. I think everybody in the business sees themselves as IT people, and more often than not, they believe that they're the experts. So they come to you and tell you about a solution, rather than asking you or getting advice as to how to fix a problem or to achieve an outcome. Because they went to a Barbie over the weekend and a mate of them told them about this great solution, and they want that solution. So they are all IT
Absolutely.
experts.
As Matt said, they usually come to you and say, we bought this and now can you put it in the network and make it secure?
Exactly.
Such a great point that Satha made, and I have a really good story with my former employer, which was really big
Who
company.
shall remain nameless.
Yeah. Really big company, really big IT team, and I was a part of research and advisory data analytics team, and we wanted to develop an app which could instantly get us insights on particular data. And we went to the IT team and we said we want to get this app developed, and we wanted to do a sentiment analysis, and we wanted to demo it so that we could further sell it to the clients. And of course, the IT team had absolutely no idea of what we were talking about. And then we went on to Radian6 and Tableau and other companies, and we assessed them, and then we brought them in, worked on our project, and delivered. Shadow IT, there goes epic story, but it is a real story, and that has happened with me even in my roles as a digital marketer. So I think when we talk about driving technology thought leadership, I completely agree with Satha that understanding the business outcome and what business needs is really critical, but also at the same time understanding what technologies and what companies are coming up to deliver that technology and with what effect is parallelly important, and it has to happen at the same time. So, and there goes the other core competency of creating a team of people who have different skill sets. Maybe there is a software developer who's passionate about all the new languages that are coming up, which will enable AI and ML, which so that you understand the difference between C, C++, Java, and then Python, Ruby on Rails, and all of that, while there is another person on the IT team who really understands and works as a business analyst to understand, all right, this is what the business needs. This is how I can visualize the solution to be, and then bridge that gap. So probably it's the IT organization as to how the composition needs to change, so that to drive technology thought leadership, you would need both those ends and people who are passionate about different things, and they have been encouraged to work together to address each other's needs.
So it's kind of making sure that even with our own teams, we have a mix of those core competencies at the end of the day. So to what Kerry was saying about that future-looking approach of things. So, Claudia, I'd love to switch gears to you now in terms of the technology thought leadership piece. I mean, we've looked at some of the, I guess some of the skills challenges we might have, but what do you see as some of the other barriers, if you like, to developing this sort of, concept or culture of technology thought leadership?
Oh, the barriers. I think we've already touched on a few of them.
Yeah.
The idea that IT and technology is viewed as merely an enabler, whereas I genuinely believe that tech should be leading the thinking on emerging, on existing or even future technologies. And that also can't happen in partnership. It can't happen without a partnership with the business.
Yep.
So we should be leading the thinking, but we should also be partnering in that leadership. So we are those experts in technology, but I think because of that, we should be bridging tech with business vision, strategy, goals, and then helping the business to implement and execute on that. And that's, I think, a unique expertise that we have in technology. Okay. That partnership piece, if you partner closely enough, and it's an ongoing challenge, because I haven't come across a business yet that hasn't had this challenge of partnership and of trying to ensure that technology is integral with the business. Then you have less of these challenges of people coming to you going, oh, I come up with this amazing tool and I don't know how to use it. Right, yeah. If you're doing these things together, then it becomes less of an issue. But tech leadership is critically important. It's also really important to business change. And helping your business be agile in that environment, being able to bring, I think, to the table, to the executive table, to the board table, what is changing, how is it changing, and how should the business be adapting or evolving or using that to create competitive differentiation. Yep. Again, we should be playing a key role in those discussions.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've talked about this, I know we were told not to talk about IT and business alignment yesterday, very clearly, but we've talked about that for a long time now, in terms of that. And the interesting thing is when we surveyed, obviously, the delegates all here today, the number, I can't remember the exact number, it was about 70% believe they felt that the CEO had kind of faith in what they were doing, and believed in sort of the initiatives they had. But we're all kind of sitting here, and every conversation I have is that's actually not the reality when we get out there. I think in general we feel that, but then when we actually get down to having these business conversations, there remains that sort of disconnect. I think that's what I'm hearing from everyone. We still have that bit of a disconnect, that there is still this perception that IT, yes, can be an enabler, but is still seen in a lot of ways as an inhibitor to what people need to get done as well. Arthur, I think you were going to say something.
I think, and to add to what Claudine was saying around the partnership, it's that inhibitor thought is around cost. And we need to start changing that conversation away from cost to value. So in order to build that partnership with the business, it's about having that value conversation as to what IT or what value IT adds to the business and how IT can enable the business to achieve those objectives.
But haven't we done that? We don't talk about TCO anymore, do we? We talk about ROI.
Yeah, but again, I think that value is more around, is it going to improve or contribute to growth, reduce risk, improve customer satisfaction?
So different value metrics, basically.
Yes, the value metrics need to change, and that's where I think the business is looking for. If you look at a lot of CEOs or boards, they're trying to drive growth, or they're focusing on growth while reducing risk. So you need to bring that into the conversation of how IT can add value in that partnership.
Good point. I'd be interested from the audience, so I was kind of tongue-in-cheek about TCO and ROI. Anybody got any sort of other, I guess, value metrics, for want of a better term, that they kind of use beyond ROI, the next step from ROI? Any hands up here? Well, almost.
I can tell you that we do,
Gary,
we do business value. So we report back to the organisation the business value. So we start with our outcome for the business when we're writing the business case, like you spoke about, and then we design, and it's really hard to get technologists not to go straight into solutioning, but then design what we can achieve to get that outcome. So we always start with the outcome. Now we always also put on a big project what the outcome is and get everyone to sign up on that. So when they're fighting about the technology and the little things, we look up at that piece of paper and we've all signed up to it and say, is it reaching that outcome? Yes or no? And that's the decision-making
So
process there. So reporting back on business value is a really hard metric
Yeah, I
to
think
report
so.
back on, but it's a felt value metric for the business. So they think very different to technologists. It's a felt value. If they feel like something is working for them and they're achieving their outcomes, then they feel the value.
So it's somewhat intangible in many ways, yeah.
Matt, we did a round table on innovation just before this, and
Yep.
people were using human experience metrics for the value that was being created. You know, the churn of customers, net promoter scores amongst staff, these sorts of factors to see whether the experience they were having with the organization were positive. The financials could be right, but actually if the human experience isn't working, there's a problem bubbling up. You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think when we talked earlier on yesterday, when we think about, we talk about innovation, we talk about automation, whatever, but ultimately we need to be thinking, what's the experience we're going to drive? But I think as part of that, we need to identify the different, if you like, experience expectations within our organizations, because the CEO's expectations can be different to the CFO's expectations, so on.
Mohan had there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I just thought I'll share an interesting metric I had worked with in the past. When I worked for a logistics company, one of the conversations we had was, what is the technology cost per consignment note? Because their unit of measure is consignment note, and the revenue is how many consignment notes I said, how much revenue I get, and the bottom line is how much cost, and then take away the cost. So I had a very interesting challenge. I was asked to say, what is the cost of technology per consignment note?
That's interesting.
That's a very different. In fact,
That'd
that
be
completely
challenging,
changed.
okay,
That
yeah.
completely changed the IT costing model. I mean, that's a different discussion for
Okay.
a different day. But if I can also have 1 minute about technology thought leadership, if you don't mind, it's more like I think it's art of the possible. A discussion about the art of the possible than somebody saying, I'm a leader in technology, so I'll give you some leadership. And a typical example in defense was when I was having a chat with the army folks, and they were saying the art of the possible is if you go to an operation where you have very limited bandwidth, I want everything to be done within that limited bandwidth. And then it so happened that I had an art of the possible type thing saying there is a protocol optimization type technology that can solve the problem. Ultimately, we actually allowed Army to implement that.
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong if you have a bottom-up approach. It's no need that a CTO should always say, I will tell you what technology to use and I shall use it. Controlled cowboyism is not bad.
Absolutely, that's guest leadership, and I think that's the thing that people have to release the reins from. It's not a command and control structure anymore. It's an empowerment structure that's moving forward, and it's becoming more popular in technology, I think.
That's a good point.
Also, what I understood from what Mohan said was probably is it about people who are more problem solvers or who have that intrinsic enthusiasm to solve a particular problem and imagine a solution and then go ahead with it. Probably those. Yeah.
Yeah, more invested. I think I've got a question over there, yeah?
Oh, just more on the metrics. We use a negative jaws thing where we want to see a reduction in the major impacts and a major increase in the release cycles of our dev teams. So that's a definite improvement in the macro that our business can see over the term.
Okay.
A material change in both of those.
Yeah, okay. Does that sort of resonate with you guys? Yeah, okay, excellent. I'd love to, we're kind of getting towards the end of time, but if there's any more questions, please throw them. I'd kind of like to think about, you and I have talked a bit about this, Aparna, before I go to your sort of fellow panelists, but it's one thing to think about these core competencies, right? But then we need to think about the business priorities we have and the people priorities we have and the technology priorities we have. We can't look at these individually, can we? Or sort of separate things. So what's your thinking around that and advice, if you like?
Yes. So even when we came up with them, it was very difficult to write distinct definitions and components for each of them because one of it touched. Did you have a?
Oh, you can.
I can. Yeah. Okay. So one of them always touched upon 2 or more components, and which is why we came about writing in our document that we've published is that all these core competencies have to be used collectively, and that also is an essential definition of core competency, which was developed in 1950s when it says it is a combination of multiple resources and skills. So it has to be seen as a set of guiding principles, and you need to work together on each of them, mostly parallelly. And probably, yeah, I was, Raju, actually, I was going to pick up on a conversation that you and I had in the morning, wherein Raju told me about a paper that he wrote way back about skills portability. And I'm not sure if you were going to talk about that. I'll let you talk. Okay. He said that the skills portability is an interesting concept as to think about what you're learning, and it can it be portable to other job roles. And that's when I thought that our core competencies really need to be looked at in that way. It's not really for just the executive suite. That's what I got from the 2 days of conversations, that it has to be every individual. Rather than focusing on role-based descriptions, probably if people focused on in their careers about getting a particular competency or one of them, and these can be applied to different roles. Wherever they go in their life, they can apply the same set of 12 core competencies and achieve business success in whatever way they want.
Okay.
So,
fantastic.
yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Raju, I think you got a question, then we'll get some closing comments from the panelists.
More as a comment, as a question, as a practicing CIO. I looked at the 12 competencies. I'm not sure if they can be put back for audience sake, but I'll just read out. The comment I have is the 12 currently, as they are depicted, are like discrete blocks. My suggestion is, because you have empower workforce, embed trust, to the next block, which talks about improve operational efficiency and enhance customer. What actually feels that if you take an input, process, and outcomes, the operational efficiency and enhance customer experience are the outcomes you strive for. But you can't just be involved in the outcomes. Yeah. You got to get into the processes, which is your executive data-driven strategy, drive technology leadership. So in a way, you can actually depict them in a flow that people can visually and also in a logical way relate to. Yeah. Then, so the 12 are very relevant. I had a quick look before I showed it to my boss. So I thought, but it may be that you can just move some blocks and put them in a different.
Oh, that's really good input, actually. So you showed them to your boss and said, well, I've got 11 of them. Is that right? Okay.
I'll probably send it to them to put in your dashboard that you showed me in the morning.
All right. So I'd just love to get some quick closing comments from the panelists here. Just really, you know, if you think about as we leave here today and we've had this conversation about these core competencies, what's the one thing that you think people should think about, Claudine, as they leave here today?
Well, I think in my mind, if you look at the 12 core competencies, they're all important at some level. But I think what I would do, I'd want to take that away and think of it in the context of the maturity of my organisation. And I think each of those 12 competencies, your organisation will be at a different level of maturity for each. I also think you then need to overlay your own organisational strategy and objectives, and how do each of those core competencies contribute to those strategies. And then you can disproportionately invest in those competencies that are most important to achieving those strategies. And I think that for me, that's a helpful way to look at it, because 12 can be, you know,
that's right, exactly.
There are a lot of them.
There's a lot of them.
And can I invest in all of them at the same level? Probably not. Yeah. Do I need them all at the same level, and the same level of maturity? Probably not. Yeah. Okay.
That's a good point. Thank you. Zata?
I think I would add to that by saying evaluate yourself against those 12 competencies and understand where you need to develop yourself. To also come back to your point of them being discrete blocks, as I mentioned earlier, they should not be seen as discrete blocks, and they should be interchangeable, and you can use some of them, all of them, or none of them, depending on the circumstance.
Right, fantastic.
And
Kerry?
I would say the same thing, that it's an interlinked, it's not a system flow. It's actually interlinked, and it's a bit like playing whack-a-mole. You might focus on one and the other one falls out. So I think you really have to understand, as Claudine was saying, the maturity of the organisation that you're in at the moment. You know, you don't take the next rinse and repeat. You think about the organisation, where it's up to, and as I said, it's a real interlinked model. You have to look at it as a holistic thing.
Perfect. Thank you. Kerry, Sata, Claudine, Aparna, thank you very much for your time today and your input. Great conversation. Thank you, everybody. Please join me in thanking the team. Thank you.